Well, this one's been a long time coming. For those who somehow haven't noticed, I've been hooked on the Danganronpa games as of late. I played the first one at the tail end of 2017, and since then, not only have I played all the other games in the series, but I've found an excuse to talk about Danganronpa in every single one of my countdowns where it would be possible. So it seemed inevitable that I would make a list about the series at some point. In fact, I teased doing this all the way back in summer of last year. It just took me this long to get around to it. This is mostly because I've been busy, and plus there were other countdowns I wanted to make, but hey, it's here now, right? Before we get into the list itself, I'm going to need to lay down a couple of important ground rules. To start with, just so all the characters are on similar footing, I'm only going to be including killing game participants from the mainline games. What that means is that while I would love to include Monokuma and the mastermind behind the first two killing games in the series, they both are disqualified. The same goes for any of the mascot characters such as Monami or the Monokubs, and any character who was introduced in Ultra Despair Girls or the anime. Another thing to keep in mind is that I never delved too deep into any of the free time events. If I did, this list would have taken even longer, so please forgive me if there's something that I missed that was hidden away in one of them. And also, while this is a no-brainer to anyone who's familiar with the series, I should probably say it anyway. This list will contain spoilers, and I don't just mean like one or two entries that you can skip over. The entire list is filled to the brim with spoilers. So, if you've never played the game and you want to use this list as a way to gauge whether or not you'd be interested in the series, don't! The entire series is getting spoiled here. Just watch a review or play the first game or something. You gotta play them in order though, that's very important. Now with all that said, let's begin. Okay, I'm just gonna put my cards on the table right now. I think V3 is the weakest of the mainline trilogy, and one of the big reasons is because I think it has the weakest cast. Let me put it this way, in the first two games, I liked just about every character. In V3, I liked about half of them. Which is to say, there were some pretty good ones in there. Case in point, Gonta. Now, maybe it's just me, but does Gonta remind anyone else of Tarzan? I mean, think about it. He's this big, burly dude who talks like a caveman and is pretty dumb when it comes to everything other than insects, but at the same time, he's a really sweet guy, and his whole goal throughout the game is to learn how to become a gentleman. Despite the fact that he's the biggest character in the game, his personality feels more like a sweet little kid, and not in a creepy way, like the kind of guy you want to give a hug, or you would want to give a hug if you weren't convinced that doing so would cause him to break your back. But that's the other thing. Due to his childish demeanor, Gonta is easily manipulated, particularly in Chapter 2 with the infamous insect meet and greet, where Kokichi convinces him to forcibly gather everyone into his research lab to show them just how wonderful bugs are. But at the end of the day, Gonta comes off as this really sweet, innocent guy who just looks for the best in people. Which is what makes Chapter 4 easily the most heart-wrenching case in the game. Because Gonta's the killer, but he doesn't know it. He doesn't have the memories of committing the crime. So even when all the evidence is laid out in front of him, he has no clue how to process it and freaks out. At least he gets the reassurance that he did the horrible act for a very noble reason. So, looks like Gonta did become a gentleman after all. He just didn't get to survive for much longer afterwards. Oh, would you look at that? Another character from V3 already. I swear I wasn't lying, guys. This is the last one for a while. And this one's a much more major character. Kaito. Out of the sort of main three that the game focuses on for a while, Kaito's easily my favorite. Don't get me wrong, I liked Maki and how she starts off as cold and distant, but as the game goes on, she starts to warm up to her new friends a bit more, and Shuichi was a Danganronpa protagonist. I mean, people say he's the best main character in the series, but I think that's mostly due to V3's interface, because in the first two games, you couldn't see your character's facial expressions outside of the trials. Here, you can usually see Shuichi's reactions to things. He's still good, just not particularly interesting. Anyway, on to Kaito. This guy is just brimming with positive energy. He brings Shuichi and Maki into his circle just because they seem like lonely people who need a friend. He has them train doing a bunch of push-ups and stuff, but you can tell it's just an excuse for them to hang out and have some sort of consistent activity in this scary world that is the Killing Game. Honestly, these midnight training scenes remind me of the clock tower scenes from Kingdom Hearts 358 over 2 days. I think I got that title right. I spent half a month studying up on KH lore, so I really hope I got that title right. To say that Kaito's an optimist and likes to take charge is an understatement. In Chapter 1, when Monokuma threatens to kill everyone if the Killing Game doesn't start, instead of, trying to commit a murder to stop that punishment from happening, he meets with everyone for a strategy on how to beat Monokuma. I think what makes Kaito stand out among everyone else is while this series has had plenty of characters that were friendly to the protagonist, Kaito's the only one who felt like a really convincing best friend. Seriously, unless you count Ultra Despair Girls, I don't think I've ever seen a Danganronpa protagonist have this close of a relationship with another character in-game. When I was looking at my pre-made list for this video, because like I said, I planned this out a while ago, the entry I was confused by the most was Ibuki. I mean, really think to yourself. Name one plot-relevant thing Ibuki does in the entirety of Danganronpa 2, and dying doesn't count. I mean, unless you count that really brief concert, there are none. No important clues unearthed during investigations, no notable relationships with other characters, no big dramatic moments. But then I realized, if I'm asking all these questions about Ibuki, I'm kinda missing the point of her character. She's not meant to be super complex. She's a comic relief character, and a pretty good one at that. Whenever everything seems really dire, she's just the right amount of off-the-wall eccentric to put a smile on your face. Everything from her hyperactive attitude, to her occasional fourth wall breaking, to repeating things and foaming at the mouth whenever she panics, and just generally not taking things as seriously as everyone around her. Ibuki would be higher on the list, but she doesn't last super long. She dies in Chapter 3, which honestly kinda pisses me off. Every other character on this list, when they die, there's usually a good story reason for it. With Ibuki, she's just another victim in a double murder that didn't even really need to be a double murder. Heck, considering the fact that Danganronpa 2's third case barely makes any sense to begin with, cutting Ibuki's death out of the equation might have actually made things add up more. Really, I think she could have been one of the survivors, and before you say, oh, she's too out there for you to take things seriously in the later chapters, consider who one of the survivors in the original Danganronpa was. In the end, Ibuki was fun while she lasted. I just wish she could have lasted longer. Up next is the character who goes through arguably the biggest 180 in the series, Fuyuhiko. Fuyuhiko is the heir to the infamous Kuzuryu clan, who are basically the Yakuza. And he spends the first 2 chapters of the game isolating himself from everyone else, much like Byakuya in the first game. However, while Byakuya was more of a smug sense of superiority, with Fuyuhiko, it's more of a brash, angry desire to be left alone. But then, everything changes when you get to the second trial. Fuyuhiko does everything he can to prevent everyone from getting to the conclusion. But the thing is, he's not the killer. Peko is. But as it turns out, pretty much from birth, she was raised to be Fuyuhiko's personal bodyguard. And the reason she killed Mahiru is because Mahiru got into a heated argument with Fuyuhiko, and she figured Fuyuhiko would want Mahiru dead. And all of this is revealed after the trial, after the votes have already been cast declaring Peko the guilty party. Peko argues that this vote was incorrect and that Fuyuhiko's the true killer because Peko is no more than a tool for him to use. And Monokuma entertains this argument and lets Fuyuhiko decide. Is Peko just a tool, or is she her own independent person? And in probably the most tear-jerking post-trial scene in the entire series, Fuyuhiko reveals that he didn't want Peko to kill Mahiru. In fact, he didn't didn't want Peko to behave as his employee at all. He just wanted her to be his friend. And while he's guaranteed to lose Peko, he's presented with the opportunity to escape the island at the cost of everyone else's lives. And, as you would guess by the fact that the game is longer than 2 chapters, he turns it down and says that Peko is her own independent human being who made her own choice. And he actually tries to stop Peko from being executed. He fails and almost dies himself, but thanks to a loophole in the rules, Monokuma is forced to resuscitate him. And by the way, while many of the executions are certainly more violent, Peko's is probably the most screwed up from a conceptual level. When you look at the way it's structured, Monokuma freaking knew Fuyuhiko would try to stop it. That's how Peko ends up dying. And after he heals up, Fuyuhiko ends up surviving to the end. And he also opens up to the other people on the island. He comes off as the kind of guy who's seen some terrible stuff in his life, but doesn't look down on others for not being as hardened as he is. He's definitely one of the more serious characters and tries to make sure everyone in the group's doing their part. That moment at the end of chapter 2 was more than enough to put him on this list. You know, in a franchise like Danganronpa, finding the craziest character in the series is no easy task. The series has got quite the smorgasbord of eccentric lunatics in its ranks, many of whom are on this list. Now, I'm not confident enough in my judgment to say that he's the craziest, but it's hard to argue that Gundham Tanaka isn't at least in the top 5. Now, I want you to take a good look at this guy's appearance, and just from that, try and guess what his ultimate talent is. If you guessed breeder, then congratulations! You've either played the game or you looked it up, because there is no way in hell you figured that out on your own. Now, I could talk about how insane this guy is, or how his voice sounds absolutely epic, but I think I'll let Gundham do the talking here.
Is that it? A shepherd dressed in his Sunday's finest still reeks of lamb, Hajime Hinata.
Does that mean you have a rebuttal?
Does that mean you have a rebuttal? That's a good line. But are you sure you're sure? If I show you how serious I am, this world might be destroyed, you know. You're so frightened you can't even make a sound. It seems you've realized our difference in status. However, the time for conviction starts now. You better entertain me to the fullest.
Despite how off-the-wall insane this guy is, he actually lasts pretty long. Just the right amount of time, really. He dies right at the end of Chapter 4, which is good because I think if he made it into Chapter 5, he seriously would have messed with the game's tone. I know I just said Ibuki would have been okay a couple entries ago, but come on, there's a pretty big difference here. He dies because he's the culprit in the 4th murder case, and surprisingly enough, he has one of the most admirable motives in the entire series. You see, in Chapter 4, Monokuma locks everyone in a funhouse and won't let them out until another murder is committed. By the way, despite the fact that this funhouse is themed after food, there is no food in it. And as everyone slowly starves to death, Hajime remarks that he would rather see everyone die of starvation than have another murder occur, which really pisses off Gundham. After he gets found out, Gundham remarks that giving up on life is an insult to life itself, and he couldn't stand seeing everyone sitting there just waiting to die. And while there's no way he'd ever admit it, it's implied that he did it as a self-sacrifice so that everyone else could survive. This is further supported by his execution. During it, he doesn't look scared. He looks like he's accepted it. That his time has finally come. I'd comment on how uncommon that is, and it is uncommon, but it happens more frequently in the series than you would think. Gundham Tanaka, everybody. Hilarious in life, and surprisingly poignant in death. Okay, here's something I bet you're all wondering. How come we haven't seen an entry from the original yet? I mean, we've already had 2 entries from V3, and I said that that one had my least favorite cast in the series. Well, here's the thing about the original's cast. Sure, I like just about every character in the game, but I also like most of them about evenly. They're all memorable in their own ways, but not a whole lot of them rise that far above the others in my mind. There were a few though, and let's start with the one that I'm sure most of you have guessed by now. Kyoko. In a game full of characters with really over-the-top and in-your-face personalities, Kyoko stands out ironically enough by being calm and subdued. She raises a ton of questions right out of the gate, mainly because she's the only character whose ultimate talent is kept a secret. And heck, in the beginning, she actually fades into the background. Seriously, aside from introducing herself to Makoto, name one thing that Kyoko does before the first trial. Can't do it, can ya? But as soon as that trial starts, you instantly know what her role is here. She basically leads the discussion the entire time. In fact, she leads the discussion for most of the cases, which makes it pretty unsurprising when she's revealed as the ultimate detective. Outside of the trials, she's constantly going off on her own, trying to figure out more about who the mastermind really is. And despite the fact that she's closer and more open with Makoto than anyone else, you still get the sense there are some things she's not telling you. This makes things especially hard in Chapter 5, when people start doubting her loyalty to the group. Because by the time you get to the decision at the end, you want to believe you can trust her, but you're not entirely sure you can. And that's kinda how Kyoko is throughout the whole game. She's really secretive and tries to keep her emotions under wraps, but at the same time, does seem to be a bit more comfortable opening up to Makoto. In a way, she kind of fulfilled the role we all thought Sayaka was going to. You know, before the thing happened. Who's next? How about the cute, lovable girl with an unhealthy obsession with video games? Well, it's good to see Spike Chunsoft knows how to appeal to their audience. In all seriousness though, Chiaki fills a similar role in Danganronpa 2 that Kyoko did in the first game. However, unlike being stoic and secretive like Kyoko, Chiaki may be a bit quiet, but loves to nerd out about all her favorite video games, which actually comes in handy more than you would expect. It's fun seeing her nerd out about her favorite video games, and her quirks like when she falls asleep standing up are nothing short of adorable. She's not as over the top or funny or even mysterious as a lot of the other characters in the series, she's just really likable. But alas, it was too good to be true. You see, throughout the entire game, there's rumblings of a traitor within everyone's midst, and it turns out it's Chiaki. Now, I say traitor, but in reality, she's with the Future Foundation, and they're actually the good guys, so it doesn't mean Chiaki's evil. It just means she's not real. Yeah, that's right, the entirety of Danganronpa 2 takes place inside of a Matrix-like simulation, and Chiaki was just a computer program to make sure everything was going smoothly. And the moment she gets revealed as the traitor, and you realize that means she's going to be executed, it is one of the most soul-crushing moments in the whole series. Especially considering the fact she's more than willing to out herself if it means everyone else will survive. Poor Chiaki. Guess it was just too good to be true. You know, within the Danganronpa series, there are a couple of unwritten rules. Case 1 reveals a murderous side of a character you thought you could trust. Case 3 is a double murder, and usually the worst one in the game. Case 4 is when things usually start to get really creative. And the rule that's relevant to this entry, the game's most eccentric characters usually don't make it to the end. I say usually, because it's pretty clear the original didn't get that memo. And I'm very glad it didn't. In case you haven't figured it out by the number of entries we have left, Toko is my favorite character in the original Danganronpa. To say Toko is socially awkward is like saying that Junko isn't the nicest person in the series. When you first meet her, she's beyond socially awkward. In fact, she lashes out at everyone because she's convinced everyone hates her. And when I first saw her, I thought to myself, you know, she is probably the character in this game who is the least suited to surviving a killing game. And keep in mind, this is the same game that has Scrawny McLadyboy and the 500-pound fanfic writer. So yeah, I thought Toko wouldn't stand a chance. Then the Chapter 2 trial happened. You see, it gets revealed that the infamous serial killer Genocide Jack is within the walls of Hope's Peak. And what do you know, it's Toko. Sort of. You see, it's a classic case of multiple personality disorder. and the two personalities couldn't be any more different. While Toko's socially awkward and beyond paranoid, Genocide Jill is a hyperactive, arrogant jokester. Although they do have some things in common, they're both hilarious, and they both have the hots for Byakuya, which is also hilarious because Toko's convinced everyone hates her, yet she's falling for the most blatantly terrible person in the cast. Regardless of which side of Toko was active at the time, she always had me cracking up. But that's just enough to get her on this list. Not necessarily this high. The reason she's this high is thanks to a little game called Danganronpa Ultra Despair Girls. You see, in this spin-off, she tags along with the main character Komaru for the entire game. And not only does this give us more socially awkward fumbles, hilarious serial killer one-liners, and weirdly perverted fantasies about Byakuya, but it also gives us some more insight to her character. You get to understand why she is the way she is, and as the game progresses, she starts to open up to Komaru enough to call her a friend. I know that sounds like a low bar, but considering the fact that it's someone as closed off and abrasive as Toko, it's really satisfying to watch. So yeah, Toko was an absolutely hilarious, but also somewhat sympathetic character, and for the record, no, I did not cheat here. I said I wouldn't include any characters from Ultra Despair Girls. I never said I wouldn't take it into account. Want to know another reason I think V3 is the weakest of the main trilogy? It's because I think it has the weakest overarching story in the series. The individual cases were fine, but the overarching story left much to be desired. It never presented any questions I really wanted answered. Aside from the Kaede twist at the beginning, the game played things way too safe for the majority of it and then jumped the shark at the end, and Monokuma doesn't really have that much of a presence as a villain. I mean, he's still there, but he doesn't give off the same aura of villainy that he did in the first two games. Luckily though, someone else stepped up to the plate. The guy who seems to be the fan favorite from this game, and mine, Kokichi. How do you sum up this guy's personality? Very simply, he's a liar. And that is basically the one thing that is consistent about him. He lies all the time, because his personality is constantly changing. Sometimes he acts like an innocent little kid, pulling pranks and getting disappointed at minor things. Sometimes he goes around insulting everyone in the game, and oftentimes his roasts are pretty funny, particularly when they're directed at Mew.
See, so I made a mistake. How rare.
It's not that rare for you to make a mistake. Your entire existence is a mistake.
And then there's the times he just goes full-on supervillain. You know, with things like the aforementioned insect meet and greet, which was really just a ploy to force everyone to watch their motive videos. He might fade into the background a little bit during the normal everyday segments, but he is easily the highlight of most of the trials in the game. Everything from his hilarious insults to him philosophically picking apart everything the characters believe in disturbing detail.
Stop it with your crappy lies.
Lies?
Everything you said is total BS. You didn't give two shits about Tenko when she was alive. But now you're like, oh no, poor Tenko, after she's dead. Come on, really?
And of course, the fact that his mood can do a complete 180 almost instantly. Also, in my eyes, Kokichi has some of the best facial expressions of any character in the series. I mean, just look at some of these. But easily the best part of Kokichi are his actions in chapters 4 and 5. You see, all throughout the game, he talks about how his goal is to win the killing game. And this is when he puts things into high gear. During the chapter 4 trial, it becomes pretty obvious that Kokichi knows more than he's letting on, and Shuichi has to lie in order to trap him. And once he does that, Kokichi gets pissed. And what does he do? He confesses the entire crime. Why?
I told you. I'm gonna get in the way by taking away the mystery-solving fun. If I can't win this game, then I'll make it boring for everyone. That's my revenge.
Of course, he doesn't have to worry about anything because he's not the killer. Gonta is. But that doesn't even compare to Chapter 5. You see, in a suspiciously similar move to Danganronpa 2's 5th case, Kokichi sets up an impossible murder with no way to know the culprit. But there is one big difference between this and Danganronpa 2's version. Here, not even Monokuma knows who the culprit is. So yeah, you actually have to team up with the series' main villain in order to solve the case. And at the end, it turns out you probably shouldn't have done that. Because it turns out the purpose of Kokichi's scheme was to get Monokuma to declare the wrong person the killer, thus invalidating the killing game's integrity and getting it shut down for good. So yeah, in the end, despite how evil Kokichi may have acted, he was actually one of the good guys. I guess with Kokichi, you never do know. There is one more thing I want to say about him though. In Chapter 5, they try to make you think that Kokichi is a successor to Junko Enoshima. And let me just say, that twist would have made way too much sense. Think about it. They're both brilliant strategists, they both drastically shift their moods constantly, they both love toying with people psychologically, and they both have an obsession with a human quality that's usually seen as negative. With Junko, it's despair, and with Kokichi, it's lies. And I would expect nothing less from someone with the title Ultimate Supreme Leader. So, who could my number one be? I'll give you a hint. If you're predicting the obvious one, you're probably right. Number one on the list is Nagito. When you first get introduced to him in Danganronpa 2, one of the first things you notice is just how similar he seems to be to Makoto, the protagonist from the first game. I mean, they're both the ultimate lucky student, they have similar appearances, and I even think Nagito's full name is an anagram of Makoto's full name. The other thing that struck me about this guy is just how boring he is. I mean, I guess he's a nice guy and a good friend, but that doesn't really make him an interesting character. That is until the first trial. All the evidence starts pointing to Nagito, and he tries to derail the conversation before anyone figures it out. And when they do start pointing the finger, this happens.
The Ultimates are working together to combat the despair of their friend's death! How wonderful! How beautiful it is!
Alright, now we're talking. I mean, oh no, Nagito, how could you? Yeah, as it turns out, Nagito is absolutely insane. He sees himself as utterly worthless and has an obsession with hope on par with Junko's obsession with despair. I'd say they're two sides of the same coin, but it really is a one-sided rivalry. Junko can barely be bothered to remember who Nagito is. Meanwhile, in Ultra Despair Girls, it's revealed that Nagito was mostly the one behind the scheme to create a successor to Junko Enoshima. Why? Because he was jealous that Makoto was the one who defeated her. He wanted to be the one to do it. But anyway, back to Danganronpa 2. In this trial, he confesses to the entire crime, despite the fact he didn't commit it. And after that, everyone chains him up in the clubhouse because they're terrified of what he might do otherwise. And how powerful is this guy? Well, Hajime was dead set on not checking out the second motive, but after one conversation with Nagito, he caved and did it anyway. But here's the crazy thing. He doesn't act like a lunatic the entire game. There are certain points where he just behaves like any other student, and you can even do free time events with him. And in the trials, you don't know what to expect from this guy. Sometimes he'll help out, and other times he'll purposely derail the conversation. One moment in particular that sticks out to me is in the third trial. Right out of the gates, Nagito casts doubt on Hajime's testimony and accuses him of being the killer, despite Nagito being the only one who knows for a fact Hajime couldn't have done it. Did I mention that this guy's a massive fanboy of the Hope's Peak students? Yeah, that's kind of the reason he's doing this. He wants to see them overcome every obstacle he throws at them. Also, I haven't even brought up his ultimate talent yet, the ultimate lucky student. You see, Makoto had the same talent in the first game, and it manifested a grand total of 1 time. With Nagito, though, it's consistent throughout the whole game, to the point where he has to play Russian roulette to advance at one point. Instead of just putting 1 bullet in the gun, he puts 5 in, because he thinks it'll be more exciting that way. But of course, you can't talk about Nagito without talking about Chapter 5. While he was crazy throughout the whole game, there are no words to describe how off the rails he goes in Chapter 5. You see, towards the end of Chapter 4, Nagito's love and adoration for the student body of Hope's Peak seems to vanish, which is quite concerning considering how crazy this guy was already, and how everyone might have just been safe due to how much he admired them. And when he's confronted about this, he threatens to blow up the entire island unless the traitor reveals themselves. But after locating the bomb, everyone figures out that it was actually just a bluff, and then they find Nagito's body in easily the most grisly body discovery scene in the entire series. Now I know what you're thinking. What kind of sick, depraved bastard could do this to someone? Simple. Nagito could. That's right. He did all of that to himself. And the trial for this murder is easily my favorite in the series, mainly because so much of it centers around how insane Nagito is. Whenever everyone thinks they have the answer, they have to ponder to themselves, is this really it? Is this really crazy enough for Nagito, or were his goals even more sinister? Just from what I've said so far, you would think he created an impossible murder in order to get everyone killed. But oh no, it's far more complicated than that. You see, he rigged the room he was in to catch on fire so everyone would grab fire grenades to put it out. And he put a deadly poison in one of those fire grenades that would kill him. And due to his ultimate luck, he knew that the traitor would be the one to throw it, causing them to be counted as the murderer. And after the trial, it's still not over. Everyone assumed Nagito's goal was to weaponize the trial system in order to kill the traitor. But Monokuma reveals Nagito's goal was actually to expose the traitor and then get everyone else killed. Now, here's the question I bet a lot of you are asking. Why did I pick Nagito over Kokichi, as they are very similar characters? Simply put, it's because Nagito's more unpredictable. While Kokichi starts as an ordinary student and works his way up to big bad supervillain status, Nagito is someone who constantly cycles between someone you can easily ignore and someone you need to keep an eye on at all times. While Kokichi may be hiding behind a facade of lies, you can tell there is a rational, functioning brain behind it all. With Nagito, you're almost positive there isn't, making him far more unsettling. I'm Defaultilizer, and feel free to join me in my next video where I talk about stuff other than Danganronpa. Bye!